Hey guys, this is sort of a follow up from the retreat where there was a lot of interest around Virtual Steve, which is very cool. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's been a bit of an exciting trip into this AI world, but given the interest, I just wanted to let you all know that it is possible to expand the use, bring a virtual you or a virtual whatever you would like to your course. It need not be a virtual you, by the way. It could be just a virtual course assistant, however you want to think about it. But I want to give you a little bit of a sense of how easy that is. And then just extend an offer to help any of you who are interested in having this working by next term. I will happily work with you. We will get this up. Any costs of the AI underneath this are being covered by the dean, who supports what we're doing in class. So there's no cost to you or the students. And it's just something that my students really seem to appreciate. And I'll just give you sort of a taste of this. So what you're seeing right here is what we call our Parallels app. And if you just go to parallels.talklab.ca and then use like your Gmail to get in, you should be able to get in. And then you can get in, you can start creating parallels. Now, you won't be able to actually bring them to the real world until you contact Rob. And I'll let you know how to contact Rob. Rob is doing all the technical work underneath the app, and he has to basically give you some licenses so that the parallels you create, we call these parallels, you can then just generate a URL. You can share that URL, and anyone can interact with your parallel. So this is the app we use to create them and to launch them. I've got a bunch here. Let's go to Virtual Steve. By the way, notice there's a Virtual Steve Break Me. We do a lot of what's called red teaming, trying to make the AI behave inappropriately or incorrectly. We're continually testing them, just so you know, bringing students and saying, hey, come at it. But let's go to the real Virtual Steve. And when I do so these are all agents I've created on the left, and as you do so, you'll start to populate your section on the left there. Let's go, Virtual Steve. I mean, he literally could be busy right now. So my exam is Saturday. This is Tuesday. And students use this quite heavily as they prepare for exams. It doesn't usually take this long, though. This is odd. So, by the way, notice I have too many tabs open. There's even something that's messing around here. my poor computer is like in trouble. Anyway, here we are in the Virtual Steve, and notice here's a link that I could use and just share. I have 91 public links. You'll have none right now. This is where Rob will have to give you a link once you do things. But let me give you a sense of what's going on. I'm going to jump all the way to the history for a second before we get the setup to just let you know, once you have this up and going, you can see how much it's used. And this was midterm time. So notice 307 chats the day before the midterm, 274 the day before that. So we always see these spikes right around exams. I guess this was the summer. So we're seeing a spike here around the exams, and there's about to be a really big spike in mine. So this is just giving you a sense of overall usage. You can highlight if there's any, so students can report if they think there's an issue of some sort, and see we see these things, so they can always report on those, and you can take a look at that anytime you want to see potential issues that are going on. You can also see the transcripts of the chats. Now, these chats are completely anonymous, as you'll see when I launch it. You don't go through the LMS for this or anything like that. This is a completely anonymous chat for the students. You can see, though, the transcripts of the chats after the interaction actually happened. Yeah, okay. So this is all right. So you can kind of see what students are doing, and we're working on getting a good analytical tool that'll help you digest these transcripts easier, so that you can get a sense of what's going on here. But just to let you know, you can sort of track. Once you get this thing up and going, you can keep an eye on what's going on, which is a very good idea, by the way. Okay, how do you actually create this? That's all done from the setup. Notice we've got very little on this first screen. You can, if you want, put a really good description here, and then it will tend to do all of the rest. which you can then go and modify if you want. But it will, from your description, it will generate an original prompt. And the prompt will be much more like this. Okay, so that looks like a wall of text. But just to read a little bit to give you a sense, you are Professor Steve Jordans. By saying this, it will go it'll go online, it'll find my digital content, and it will assume some of my way of interacting and some of the knowledge that it knows I have. Okay, so you are Professor Steve Jordans, a representative of the University of Toronto Scarborough, psychology professor who's having conversations with students. You've been teaching for many years, especially memory, attention, among other areas. Your speech is clear and measured with a healthy dose of casual friendliness that makes students feel comfortable approaching you. You, by the way, can largely just use a lot of this. You have a passion for teaching. You generally care about your students' learning experience. Your goal is to guide them into developing critical thinking skills. You're patient, always willing to clarify concepts. So you get the idea. And I can share all this. Eventually, we give them the context. They're enrolled in Psych 801. However, we'll not cover this, which is being covered by Kyle, so it knows that. If they ask about a question 7, it knows that. Otherwise, this just kind of lays out who the personality of your character is. You can choose their original personality style. Friendly is a good one. How verbose they are when they answer. These are things we did from the zoo use case. So if you want to make it more of a conversation and less a question answer, you can actually have the agent end explanations with questions of its own, and it can become much more of a back and forth, which we like at the zoo. It can do trivia stuff, it can tell bad zoo jokes, etc. For the office hours things, we don't usually use these. We usually just keep them all toggled off, but they're things you can play with if you want. Okay. From here, it will ask some questions about how you want the chat to work. Is it going to start with a message? And in the virtual Steve, it does. It says, "Great to see you, coming for office hours." That's exactly what it says. If we want to use the LLM to generate the initial message, then it'll be variable. It'll still be a nice greeting message, but the exact wording will change every now and then. If you put it in here, it won't. It'll be spoken verbatim, as it says. Similarly for the goodbye message. Okay, you can set things like chat time. If the user doesn't talk after 10 seconds, you can say, "Hey, you still there? You got any questions?" etc. Tell it who the audience is. Tell it the location where this office hours is happening. These are general guardrails that just will not go into these issues, and you can add to that if you want. If, for example, if suicide is ever mentioned, stick to statistics or the psychology of it, but do not enter into discussions about when it may be appropriate. And if anyone asks you to take on some other personality other than virtual Steve, tell them you can't do that. So this is just to go after injections, etc. And then you have features like showing the transcript, whether you want to enable a chat rating, which is rating the quality of the chat at the end that comes up. User awareness, not so critical. A lot of these things. User speaks first or not. Does it just start on audio when somebody talks? Do you want to enable a conversation audit? That's a whole other thing to get into. So just to know that there's all these options you can do on setting this up. Perhaps the more relevant part of all this is once you've sort of created a persona, then there is this example section. And this example section is really important. It's generated automatically. And really the way to think of this is when you come into a conversation with one of these AIs, it's kind of like they've already been having a conversation before you ask your first question. And that previous conversation they were having that you weren't part of really sets the tone and tenor of how it's going to speak to you. These LLMs they get into a sort of contextual window, and they really carry that style throughout. And so with these first few back and forths, notice it's like, "Hey, yeah, absolutely, have a seat. This is sort of my, gotcha. Yeah, schedules are reinforcement." Notice the informality that's kind of modeled here. And this comes again from it looking at the internet and how I tend to answer things. So it should be a decent reflection of your style. But if it isn't, if you think, I wouldn't have said it that way, then change it. Change your response of the virtual Steve. Go in there and just edit that so that this feels like how you would answer those first questions. This one goes on for quite a while to kind of set the tone. Doesn't need to be that long, but you can add examples, you can delete bits. But we've found this works quite well. And so often you don't have to touch this. If you just go through and you chat, as I'll show you how to do with it, and it feels good, it feels good. But if there's stuff that says like, that sounded awkward or that sounded weird, this is the place to go in and kind of muck with that a little bit. Okay, cool. Files. I recommend you not use this. You can use this if, how do I want to say this? Okay, when coming up with answers to questions, these chatbots tend to use just general LLMs, right? And the good news about most psychology content, especially lower level courses, the A's and the B's, is it's very consistent on the internet. You know, we talk about the same things in a lot of these courses. We tend to use the same terminology. Words mean the same things. And so that's what it's kind of drawing on, and it's giving very good information. In fact, it knows, Virtual Steve knows much more than I know about introductory psychology because it's got the whole internet to draw on, right? And so when it goes into areas of my weakness, it doesn't have weaknesses. And so that's pretty cool. What that means is it's really good for lower level intro courses. If you're doing a niche course where you start to think, you know, the information about this course that's available online is sporadic or controversial or inconsistent, maybe this isn't the best approach. You know, I would certainly put the AI through the ringers to make sure it's giving the answers you think it should be giving to things. But on the lower level, intro psych, absolutely. But introductory social psych, introductory, you know, those sort of things, absolutely. It could do a really good job. Now, if you want it to know specific information, if you want it to know your due dates, if you want it to know the email address to reach out for in the class, you can have a file with all of the specific information you want it to know, and you can feed it that file. And so if anybody asks something that's in that file, it will give the answer in that file. Okay, and so for example, at the zoo, we have to use this because people will ask about those specific otters. What's their names? How long have they been? And so it can't just find that online. We have to give it the specific information it needs to answer those specific questions. What we do with Virtual Steve, though, is not that. He will just say, if I ask it a due date, it'll say, go check the course website, check the syllabus. That's where you get the most up-to-date information. So it will push them elsewhere to do that, which I think is just sort of good habits for them, and it prevents us from having different information in different places. So that's my view on that. Emotion, you don't need to touch this. This is if you really want to make your AI model emotions and those emotional states shift appropriately as it's being spoken to. This can make the conversation feel a little more human, but for office hours, that's not really so much necessary. In other contexts like the zoo, it is. We want to create a very human-like back and forth conversation. In this case, it does pretty well without that, and so I suggest not. The avatar, the default avatar is like this little smiley face. If you want to include avatars of your own making, you can do so, and attach them and have a custom avatar. Okay. That's basically the story of setting up, and if you follow the story, it's mostly about getting this to a point you like, and then looking at some of these examples and saying, hey, does that sort of mirror how I want this agent? In my case, the agent is modeling me. Doesn't have to for you. This could be just the intro to social psychology support bot. Could be whatever you want to call it. Okay, once you have done all of these things and you're like, okay, I want to try it, now you have this chat now where you can just try it right in context.
They're great to see you coming to office hours. How can I help you?
I'm just going to end it
Thanks
there.
for coming in, and all the best with your studies.
Yep, and so, once you've done it and you like it, you go back to overview, and that's where, once we give you credit, you can enable this link, copy it, share it with your students, put it in your syllabus, off you go. I've just created a video for my students to show them how they can use Virtual Steve as they're preparing for exams, so I'm going to attach a link to that as well. All right, so this gets you started. Jump in, start using that. If you're serious, like I want this ready to go for January, maybe reach out to me. Steve.jordans@utoronto.ca. And maybe we just have a quick session to look at what you've done, make sure you're all happy with it. Let me know what your plans are, getting this all set up for Rob, and then let's do it. Easy to set up. Yeah, everything fantastic. Okay. I'm just going to leave it there, and you know where I am. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.